The mansion was silent that morning, except for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Sunlight streamed through tall glass windows, bouncing off marble floors and polished furniture. To anyone looking in from the outside, the house was nothing short of a palace, a symbol of power and wealth. But to the man who lived inside, it was nothing more than a fortress, built not only to protect his riches but to shield his weary heart from the world. The millionaire had lived a life of luxury, yet he trusted almost no one. Over the years, friends had deceived him, business partners had cheated him, and even relatives had tried to take advantage of him. Money, he had learned, was a magnet for both admiration and betrayal. He kept it close, guarded, locked away in a towering steel safe in his study, a safe that held not just money, but memories of his father's watch, his mother's pearls, and other treasures he dared not lose. But on this particular morning, something unusual stirred in his mind. He had hired many employees over the years, but none intrigued him more than his current maid. She was quiet, hard-working, and dignified in a way that caught his attention. She never gossiped, never complained, and carried herself with an honesty he rarely saw. Still, a nagging thought pressed against him: was her loyalty genuine, or just another mask? That question haunted him, and so he devised a test. A cruel test, perhaps, but in his mind, a necessary one. With deliberate care, he spun the dial of the massive safe and pulled the heavy door wide open. Inside, neat stacks of $100 bills gleamed under the soft light. Velvet boxes lined the shelves, each holding jewelry worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. It was temptation in its purest form, an ocean of wealth left unguarded. The millionaire stood back for a moment, studying the scene as though painting a picture. The safe gaped like a mouth waiting to swallow whoever dared step too close. He left it exactly like that, wide open, and walked out of the study. But he didn't go far. He positioned himself down the hallway, where he could see through a barely cracked door. His heart thudded as though he were the one being tested. He told himself this was business, nothing personal. Yet deep inside, he longed for something more than proof of honesty. He longed to believe that in a world where greed reigned supreme, someone, anyone, could resist the glitter of gold. As footsteps echoed softly in the corridor, his chest tightened. It was her, the maid, pushing her cleaning cart, humming a low tune to herself, unaware of the drama she was about to step into. She turned toward the study, reaching for her duster, ready to begin her work. And there it was, the moment of truth. The millionaire held his breath, every muscle tense. Would she fall for the trap? Or would she reveal a strength greater than all the wealth that safe could hold? The maid stepped into the study with her usual quiet grace, unaware of the eyes watching her from the shadows of the hallway. She had worked in this house long enough to know every corner, every surface that needed dusting, every streak on the tall windows that needed polishing. But that morning, something immediately caught her attention. Her eyes froze on the massive safe. Its heavy steel door swung wide open like a secret laid bare. For a brief moment, she stopped breathing. She glanced around the room, as though expecting the millionaire to appear at any second. But the room was empty, the house unusually silent. Slowly, almost cautiously, she stepped closer. The fortune inside glistened, neat stacks of crisp $100 bills, gold coins, diamond necklaces resting in velvet boxes. Her reflection shimmered faintly in a silver platter that leaned against the inner wall of the safe. Her chest rose and fell with a sudden heaviness. Her children's faces flashed before her eyes, her teenage son who needed new shoes for school, her daughter who had begged for piano lessons, the mounting bills sitting unpaid on her kitchen table at home. In that instant, the money inside the safe wasn't just paper. It was opportunity. It was security. It was everything she could ever dream of providing for her family. Her hand trembled ever so slightly as she lifted it, then paused. She let out a long sigh, the kind that comes from years of struggle, of knowing the difference between right and wrong even when wrong seemed easier. No, she whispered softly to herself, almost like a prayer. If it isn't mine, it doesn't belong in my life. With deliberate care, she placed both hands on the edge of the heavy door and pushed. The hinges groaned as it swung shut, sealing the treasures inside once again. The sound echoed through the study, firm and final, like a choice being locked in. Her shoulders relaxed as she turned back to her cleaning. She dipped her cloth into a small bucket of water, wrung it out, and began wiping the desk as though nothing had happened. The safe might as well have been invisible, just another piece of furniture in the grand house. Yet, as she moved, she kept humming softly, a simple tune her grandmother used to sing when life grew hard. It was a song about faith, about dignity, about carrying yourself with honor even when the world tested you. If anyone had walked in at that moment, they might have seen only a maid at work, humming while she polished wood and dusted shelves. But to the man hidden just beyond the door, she had revealed something extraordinary. For her, integrity wasn't a decision she struggled with. It was simply who she was. From his hidden place in the hallway, the millionaire's eyes widened. He had expected hesitation, perhaps even temptation, but what he saw left him completely still. She hadn't touched a single bill. She hadn't even lingered. Instead, she closed the safe as if it were nothing more than a cupboard accidentally left ajar. For a man who had spent years guarding every dollar, who had seen greed twist even the closest of companions, the sight was unbelievable. His pulse pounded in his ears. He leaned closer, almost pressing against the doorframe, trying to catch every detail of her expression. But there was no trace of longing, no spark of desire. Only peace. He lingered there for several moments, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar, shame. Shame for doubting her, shame for assuming everyone had a price. And yet, a small voice inside him whispered, perhaps she simply didn't notice. Perhaps she didn't understand what she saw. Unable to silence his doubt, he stepped into the study. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, breaking the silence. The maid straightened at once, her cloth still in hand, her eyes lowering respectfully. The millionaire cleared his throat, masking his unease with a tone of casual authority. "Tell me," he asked, his voice smooth but probing, "did you notice anything unusual in here today?" The maid tilted her head slightly, her expression calm. Then, to his surprise, she offered a gentle smile. "Only that you trust me enough to let me work here. That's unusual enough for me." Her words struck like a lightning bolt. He faltered, blinking at her. Trust. That wasn't what he had given her, not consciously, at least. This had been a test, a trap even, not an act of trust. Yet she interpreted it as a gift, a sign of faith in her character. "You didn't see the safe?" he pressed, his voice a little sharper now. "Oh, I saw it," she admitted softly, nodding. "But I also saw something more valuable. The fact that you left it open means you must believe I would never betray you. That is an honor I could never throw away." The millionaire swallowed hard. For a man accustomed to boardrooms, negotiations, and power struggles, words rarely left him speechless. But at that moment, silence clung to him. He studied her carefully, her worn uniform, her tired hands, the calm dignity in her eyes. She wasn't rich, she wasn't powerful. By every measure of his world, she had little. And yet, in that instant, she seemed wealthier than he had ever been. He forced a smile, though his voice cracked as he murmured, "I see." What he didn't admit, not yet, was that she had already passed a test he never believed anyone could. The room was heavy with silence. The millionaire stood near the desk, his hands resting on the polished wood as if he needed its strength to steady himself. He had set the trap with the arrogance of a man who believed money could expose the truth in people. Yet now, face to face with the maid who had passed the test so quietly, he found himself more unsettled than relieved. At last, his voice broke the stillness. "Why?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Why didn't you take anything? You must need the money. I've seen how hard you work, how tired you look. Don't you have children? Don't you struggle." The maid set down her cloth and met his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, no shame, only a calm strength. She clasped her hands together, as though gathering her thoughts. "Need," she said softly, "is something I know very well. There are nights when I go without so my children can eat. Days when I wonder if I can afford the bus fare to get to work. Yes, I need money, but need does not justify stealing." Her words hit him harder than any business loss ever had. He had built empires, crushed rivals, and yet here was a woman, with so little, standing before him with a dignity far greater than his own. She continued, her voice steady but tender. "My children look at me to learn how to live. If I take what doesn't belong to me, what lesson do I give them? That greed wins. That honesty has no place in this world. No, I would rather scrub floors my whole life with clean hands than touch $1 earned in shame." The millionaire's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist that survival sometimes excused desperate choices. But something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, kept him quiet. "Respect." She looked down for a moment, then back up at him, her eyes shimmering but unyielding. "Do you know what dignity is worth?" she asked softly. "It is the one treasure no one can steal, no one can buy, and no one can lock away in a safe. It is the inheritance I want to leave my children." The millionaire's chest ached as her words sank deep. He thought of his own childhood, of parents who had taught him lessons about honor before money had consumed his life. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten those values. He had measured worth only in dollar signs and stock shares, while she measured it in something far richer. For the first time in years, he felt small, not because of weakness, but because he stood before greatness. And it didn't wear a suit or sit at a boardroom table. It wore a maid's uniform, with calloused hands and a heart as pure as gold. The millionaire stood frozen, his mind whirling with the maid's words. For years, he had thought wealth was about accumulation, gathering more, guarding it fiercely, locking it behind steel and numbers. But in that single conversation, she had shattered his definition of wealth. Dignity, integrity, honor, these were riches no amount of gold could buy. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling in a way he had not allowed in decades. "You've taught me more about wealth in 5 minutes than I've learned in a lifetime." The maid blinked in surprise. She bowed her head slightly, mistaking his words for mere kindness. "I only did what anyone should do," she said quietly. But he shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "You did what most would never do." The weight of his guilt pressed heavier with every second. He had doubted her. Worse, he had tried to lure her into failure, as if her integrity were a game for him to test. And yet, instead of resenting him, she stood there with grace, as though his mistrust had not wounded her spirit. The millionaire turned and glanced at the safe, still locked tight. Suddenly, the money inside seemed empty. What good was a fortune if it only bred suspicion and loneliness? What good was wealth if he had to test every soul who entered his life, waiting for betrayal? He faced her again, this time with tears glistening in his eyes. "You said your children look at you to learn. Let them also look at me today." The maid frowned, unsure what he meant. With deliberate steps, the millionaire crossed the room, opened his desk drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents he had prepared long ago, scholarship papers for a foundation he had never followed through on. He placed them on the desk. "From this day forward," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "your children's education will be fully paid for. College, books, everything. No child of yours will be denied opportunity because of money." The maid gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Sir, I can't accept that. It's too much." But he shook his head. "It's not too much. It's not enough. You reminded me today what wealth truly means, and for that, I owe you more than I could ever repay." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not greed. She bowed deeply, whispering, "Thank you. Not for the money, but for believing in us." The millionaire smiled, a real smile, not the practiced one he wore in boardrooms. For the first time in years, his heart felt light. He realized that riches weren't what lay behind a locked door. Riches were what stood before him now: honesty, dignity, love, and trust. That night, as he closed the safe once more, it no longer felt like a treasure chest. It felt like a box of meaningless trinkets compared to the wealth he had discovered in a maid's heart.